My parents met in Greenwich Village during Prohibition at a drinking party, and then they got married 3 weeks later, and they spent 2 years looking for a place to buy in the country, particularly in New Jersey. And finally they found an old fruit farm, 30 acres, with a big apple orchard and a big vineyard. My dad made barrels and barrels of wine all the time, and they bought that, and that's where I grew up. I remember my mother, we were building an addition to the house. I remember my mother standing there sort of right by a big hole and holding my sister and saying to me, "This is your dear little sister, and your job is to help me take care of her." I was 2. But I took that extremely seriously, and wanting to help people has been a part of my life. Later, another sister came along, 2 years later after the first sister, and then when I was about 8, my little brother Doran was born, and he and I were very close. I taught him to read and looked after him a lot, and but when he was 6 years old, he got polio, and that was 2 years before the Salk vaccine, and he died. He was in the hospital for 6 weeks, I think, and in an iron lung. Anyway, that really was terribly hard for our family, naturally. And but I remember just several days after that happened, after he died, I was upstairs in my bedroom, and it was winter, cold, dark winter. But I opened the window wide, and I went and looked out, and all the stars were out there in the cold, dark sky. And I thought to myself, what can I learn from this terrible thing that's happening? And I thought, okay, I can learn to try always to appreciate life while I have it. So, and that was true. So I do try to appreciate life. But the first incident I remember about writing a poem is I was in 3rd grade, and we were assigned to write poems about something, and I don't remember the poem specifically, but I wrote a poem, and then a month or 2 later, the 3rd grade teacher told me she had sent it off to some kids magazine, and it had been published. She hadn't told me until it actually got published. So I was flabbergasted, and then I have in the box of folders and pictures and whatnot, I think it's 3 poems that I wrote through grade school and high school. But I wasn't especially thinking of myself as a poet. I loved working with words, and I wrote papers all the time, naturally. And then when I went to college at Oberlin, I majored in English, even though I thought that was kind of a cop-out because English was so easy for me. And then I decided to go teach in England, teach 1st grade for the Air Force. There I met who is now my ex-husband, Ken Rekow. He was an intelligence officer there on the base. He had grown up in Minnesota. I admired his intelligence and all his practical gifts. I mean, he could do all sorts of things, fix things, cook great meals, do all these things that I wasn't especially good at, practical things. And so we, at the end of that first year, we were married there in England, in Rugby, and we toured around Europe. But then Ken didn't really want to stay in the Air Force, and I didn't either. So lots of paperwork all the time. So he applied to some law schools, and he was accepted at several and decided to go to the University of Chicago. So we went from England to Chicago, and he went through law school, and he's been practicing law ever since. As Ken was in his last year of law school, we were thinking about, oh dear, where should we live? So then he said, well, when he was working for the Forest Service before the Air Force, he had, out in the summer, he had come out to the Northwest, and he was very impressed with the Northwest, the beautiful water and mountains and scenery and nature. So we decided to drive out here and take a look. When we first came, we had dinner with some of his college friends, and we told them we had driven around Seattle, but we didn't see enough nature, enough country anywhere near Seattle, even then. So the people we were having dinner with said, well, and these are their exact words, people like you should go live on Bainbridge Island. So the next day we got on a ferry and came to Bainbridge, and that was it. Soon after we moved to the farm, we met Minnie Rose Lovegren. At that time, she was in her 70s, I guess, and she was from England, fascinating woman, and she kept phoning us, offering us a German Shepherd dog. She always kind of reached out to people that way. So eventually we decided, sure, we'd like a German Shepherd dog, and we drove over to her house. I found her absolutely fascinating. She knew so much about chickens. She loved chickens, but she knew all kinds of things about other animals and about children. It turned out she had done much babysitting over the years, child sitting, and she knew about gardens. And she was this fabulous storyteller. She would just go on and on and on in a fascinating way. So I started hiring her to babysit, which was a help because we still didn't know very many people. And she was always telling stories, and she was very good with the kids. So then when she was 86, she was diagnosed with cancer, and they put her in the hospital in Seattle. And I knew she'd always wanted to write a book about how to raise chickens, but she was always too busy running around helping people and whatnot. So I got on the ferry with my tape recorder and went into Seattle, into her hospital room, and said, okay, Minnie Rose, now we're starting your book. And she just plunged right in. She had been teaching people for so many years how to raise chickens. She knew exactly what to say, and I would tape record it and then take it home and transcribe it on an old-fashioned typewriter. So then that's how the chicken book got started. And then as I was working on the manuscript, another friend of Minnie Rose's and mine, a very strong woman who used to help Minnie Rose with her big bags of feed and whatnot, Elizabeth Hutchison was her name. She came to me and said, I'd like to offer to illustrate that book you're working on. And I had no idea she was an artist. I knew she was very intelligent. So I went to her house, which was nearby, and she showed me her artwork, and I said, okay, you're it. This is it. We got it locally printed, and then all of us who knew Minnie Rose, we carried it around in boxes and to sell to people for weeks, and we printed 1,000 copies, and they all sold out in the first month. So, and Minnie Rose did die 3 months later of cancer, but in the meantime, she had an autograph party down at Arts and Crafts and appeared on TV. A year or two before that, I had signed up for a workshop, writing workshop, with Bob McAllister, who called himself the Mad Priest of Bainbridge Island, and rightly so. That first class met in the high school. It was actually, at that time, it was an extension course for Olympic College, but we soon made it a sort of a private course, and it, for years and years after that, 44 years really, it's still going. Not too long after that, he started having me substitute for him when he was too busy to teach the workshop. And of course, as you know, Bob was always busy doing all kinds of things. He was a genius as a teacher, as a builder of houses, as an actor, as a director of plays. He directed 100 plays at Bainbridge High, and he was just extremely creative and fascinating. About 40 years ago, Everett came to my poetry workshop when I was teaching it. And I figured out almost right away who he was, because my oldest daughter had said to me when she was in high school that Bob McAllister was so imaginative, and she said, but Everett Thompson is the nicest teacher. And I remembered that, and then when he came to the first meeting for our workshop, I had everybody introduce themselves, and he introduced himself. I said, oh, you're the English teacher. And then he came to the workshop for about 2 years, and sometimes we went to readings and things together with Washington Poets Association. And we became good friends. We had a lot of things in common. But then, his life got really busy and whatnot. So then we didn't see each other for many, many years, or hardly ever saw each other. I did have him read it several times at the Paul's Bohemian. He was a wonderful poet. And by the way, the reason our publishing company, when we published together, when we got together, we published quite a few more books, which we both loved doing. But the reason we called our publishing company Northwest Trillium Press is because when he first came to the workshop, he had written a wonderful poem about trilliums. And then years later, before we were together at all, I had written a poem about trilliums, a different kind of poem. And so then we decided to name our publishing company Northwest Trillium Press. Of course, I'd be delighted to read a poem. Thank you. This is the first poem I ever had published many years ago. And it's a poem about where I grew up, in Martinsville, New Jersey, that little town. Went to school with 2 grades in a room. Okay, and this all happened. Spring in Martinsville, New Jersey. When I was a girl, spring never came until the Van Middlesworth brothers rumbled their team and wagon up Chimney Rock Road. King and Barney kept their pace. I'd wait to hear them wagoning up our lane, familiar over dirt and stone. They knew the place, the vegetable garden, and between the Concord grapes. Evenly they plowed through morning, carved up the heavy rug of grass and curled it over in diagonals and straights. Like toothpaste squeezed, the greens turned over into chocolate. I saw red-winged blackbirds flash their folded signals. Lilacs came unsheathed and shed their rain. 2 old horses and 2 old men had dug up spring again.